In the early hours of November 27, 1983, everything was proceeding normally at Barajas Airport in Madrid. While many people slept, a gigantic wide-body aircraft, arriving from Paris, was descending toward runway 33 under the faint supervision of air traffic control. It was an Avianca Boeing 747, one of the largest and most powerful airplanes in the world, carrying 192 people. On board, the fatigue was evident. There had been many hours of waiting and connecting flights, but excitement also filled the air. Many of the passengers were returning home to Colombia to take part in one of the most important cultural events in the Spanish-speaking world. November 26, 1983, Charles de Gaulle Airport, Paris, France. Avianca 011 was a symbol of the connection between Latin America and Europe. It was a route that linked Frankfurt with Bogotá, with stops in Paris, Madrid, and Caracas. This route was not only vital for business and tourism, but also for culture. Avianca, one of the oldest airlines in the world, maintained this itinerary as one of its international flagships. It's 10 p.m. in Paris, and here, Avianca Flight 011 has been waiting for more than an hour to depart from Madrid, its second stop in Europe before crossing the Atlantic to Colombia, as a group of passengers is arriving late from Frankfurt due to the cancellation of one of the connecting flights. Even so, the crew decided to wait, honoring their commitment to the passengers. The aircraft assigned to operate this flight was a Boeing 747-283B Combi, registration HK-2910X, affectionately nicknamed Olafo by Avianca employees. This version of the 747 had the particular feature of transporting both passengers and cargo on its main deck, making it a versatile solution for long routes with high demand. Built in 1977 and originally operated by Scandinavian Airlines, it was acquired by Avianca in 1982. This 747, capable of carrying more than 350 passengers, was powered by 4 Pratt & Whitney JT9D engines, known for their power and efficiency. The cockpit featured analog navigation technology typical of the era, without advanced automation like the modern flight management systems FMS we see today. Avianca, founded in 1919, was Colombia's flag carrier and the second oldest airline in the world after KLM Royal Dutch, founded just 3 months earlier. In 1983, Avianca operated a fleet of 50 aircraft, including 5 Boeing 747s. Flight 011 carried 169 passengers and 23 crew members, a total of 192 people, including prominent Latin American intellectuals such as Jorge Ibargüengoitia, Marta Traba, Ángel Rama, Manuel Scorza, as well as the Spanish pianist Rosa Sabater, who were traveling to Bogotá for the first meeting of Hispanic American culture, convened by President Belisario Betancourt. Previously in the city of Paris, they had been attending several round tables, giving lectures, and participating in cultural events. At the controls of the aircraft was Captain Tulio Hernandez, 58 years old, an experienced pilot with 23,215 flight hours, 2,432 of them on the Boeing 747. Alongside him was First Officer Eduardo Ramirez, 36 years old, with 4,384 flight hours, 875 of them on this type of aircraft. The flight engineer, Juan Laverde, 57 years old, had 15,942 flight hours, 3,676 of them on the 747, and 25 years of experience with the airline. There were also 2 relief flight engineers, Daniel Zota and Julio Flores Camacho, although their flight hours were not specified. Completing the crew were 17 flight attendants. Finally, at 10:25 p.m., the plane began accelerating down runway 09 right. They lifted off without any problems and began their short journey toward Madrid. The aircraft crossed the skies over central Spain under a clear sky, but with the dense darkness typical of late November. It was just past midnight on Sunday, the 27th. The flight had been smooth up until that point. From the cockpit, the pilots were already in contact with Madrid's control center and received authorization to begin their descent from 11,000 to 9,000 feet. It was a quiet night with little air traffic, which allowed them to receive direct instructions to proceed toward the Campo Real Voar, and from there, establish themselves on the approach to runway 33 at Barajas Airport. Everything seemed routine, but small errors were beginning to accumulate. With the heading already established, the pilots reviewed the navigation chart to prepare for the final segment of the descent. At what altitude should we arrive at Campo Real?
At 4,000 feet.
Perfect. Minimum sector altitude?
3,282 feet.
Correct. Got it. However, although the first officer correctly pronounced 3,282 feet, the notes in the cockpit, and possibly the reference marks used during the approach, indicated 2,382 feet, switching the order of the first two digits. Neither of the pilots noticed this error, and they continued the descent. With the initial authorized altitude, the pilots continued descending, but made an unexpected decision. They turned right with the intention of aligning with runway 33 earlier than planned. The turn was made 5.8 nautical miles before reaching the Campo Real VOR, which deviated them from the intended approach path. This maneuver, although not completely irregular, required extreme precision, as it took them away from the electronic aids of the ILS system. While trying to tune in to the runway's localizer, they were unable to capture its signal. From the cockpit, they assumed the system was malfunctioning. What they didn't know was that they were still too far away to intercept it properly. Without visual or electronic confirmation of their exact position, and unaware of their misalignment with the runway centerline, the crew continued descending. The descent was gradual but continuous. 4,000 feet, 3,500, 3,000, 2,500. By this time, they were already below the minimum established for the approach due to the initial error in recording the minimum altitude, flying blind over a hilly area east of Madrid. None of the three crew members detected the deviation in their trajectory or realized they were flying at a dangerous altitude, nor did air traffic control, which was no longer following them by radar at that time. Moments later, the GPWS began to issue the first warnings.
Whoa, up, think rate. Whoa, up, terrain.
The captain, convinced that they were properly positioned in the air, ignored any corrective action to these alarms. But the alarms did not stop until finally, the flight engineer spotted the terrain. Terrain, watch out! Maximum power! But it was already too late. At 12:07 a.m., the Boeing 747 struck the top of a hill at an altitude of about 780 meters near the town of Mejorada del Campo. The landing gear and the lower part of the fuselage were torn off on first contact. The plane continued moving uncontrollably for another 300 meters before crashing into the ground, disintegrating and bursting into flames. The impact occurred in a small watercourse, 12 kilometers from runway 33 at Barajas. At 12:30 a.m. local time, rescue teams from the Civil Guard, Madrid firefighters, and medical personnel from La Paz Hospital arrived at the scene. But the rugged terrain and darkness made operations difficult. Of the 192 occupants, 181 died instantly due to the impact and fire. Only 11 survived, all of them seriously injured, including the entire Nager family, Patrick, Elizabeth, Caddy, and Ludovic, and Hugo Bernal, a Colombian engineer who escaped unharmed after unfastening his seatbelt and breaking a window. Other survivors included Carmen Navas de Garlish, Beatriz Boniol, Palma Vergara, Diego Poca, Peter Steinman, and a baby, rescued by Patrick Nager, although her parents did not survive. The identification of the victims took weeks, using dental records and personal belongings. Among the wreckage, teams found fragments of manuscripts belonging to the deceased intellectuals and a charred piano that had belonged to Rosa Sabater. What had happened? How could the pilots have made so many mistakes in the final minutes of the flight? The investigation into the crash of Avianca Flight 011 was led by Spain's Civil Aviation Accident and Incident Investigation Commission, with the collaboration of the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, and aircraft manufacturer Boeing. Investigators arrived at the crash site in the early morning hours of November 27, 1983, facing rugged terrain and the charred remains of the Boeing 747. The black boxes, consisting of the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, and the flight data recorder, FDR, were recovered in good condition. However, only one of the 4 recording channels from the CVR, specifically the one that captured ambient cockpit sounds, could be used, limiting the available information about the conversations between the crew members. The final report, published in 1984, classified the accident as a case of controlled flight into terrain. The main cause identified was human error. Captain Tulio Hernandez did not follow the approach chart instructions and descended below the minimum safe altitude levels, ignoring the automatic warnings from the Ground Proximity Warning System, GPWS. Several contributing factors were identified. Premature deviation. The crew made a turn toward runway 33, 5.8 nautical miles before reaching the Campo Real VOR, leading them onto an incorrect path and causing them to descend below the minimum safe altitude in an area with elevated terrain. Confusion over minimum altitude. First Officer Eduardo Ramirez communicated an incorrect minimum altitude of 2,382 feet instead of the established 3,282 feet, contributing to the aircraft descending below a safe altitude. Failure to respond to the GPWS. Although the GPWS issued terrain proximity alerts, the crew did not perform proper evasive maneuvers to avoid the crash until it was too late. Deficiencies in crew resource management, CRM. The coordination among crew members was inadequate, with an unclear distribution of tasks and a lack of cross-verification of critical information. Errors in air traffic control, ATC. Madrid Barajas Tower transferred control to the pilot without verifying his actual position and without ensuring the aircraft was on the correct approach path. The report also highlighted that there were no mechanical failures in the aircraft and that weather conditions were favorable, with good visibility and no significant wind. Furthermore, it was noted that the crew showed no signs of fatigue, as they had been on duty for only a few hours at that time. The crash of Flight 011 had a significant impact on aviation. Avianca implemented an intensive CRM program to improve cockpit communication, particularly in hierarchical cultures where co-pilots might hesitate to question a captain. In 1984, Barajas Airport reviewed its air traffic control procedures, introducing stricter protocols to verify aircraft positions during approaches. ICAO recommended that airports in areas with elevated terrain adopt more advanced navigation systems, a measure that was accelerated following this accident. Globally, the crash underscored the need for better terrain awareness systems, leading to the adoption of Enhanced Ground Proximity Warning Systems, EGPWS, in the 1990s, which became mandatory for commercial aircraft starting in 2001. Avianca also retired the flight number 011 for this route, although today it operates a flight with the same number between Madrid and Bogotá using a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. Avianca Flight 011 was a preventable tragedy that exposed human and systemic failures in a demanding environment. A functional Boeing 747, 192 lives, and a series of mistakes that ended on a hill in Mejorada del Campo. The final report pointed to Captain Tulio Hernandez's error in descending below minimum safe altitude levels, the lack of coordination with First Officer Eduardo Ramirez, and the failure of the Barajas controller to intervene as the main causes. The wounds from November 27, 1983, still resonate in Madrid, marking the deadliest accident in Avianca's history and the second worst on Spanish soil, surpassed only by the Los Rodeos disaster in 1977. Jorge Ibargüengoitia was traveling with his latest work, of which no copies existed, and it burned along with him. At the crash site, in the Balcones de Mejorada del Campo, a small monument was erected in 1984, a stone cross with a plaque that reads, "In memory of the 181 victims of Avianca Flight 011, November 27, 1983. At Barajas Airport, a commemorative plaque was installed in 1985 in Terminal 1, listing the names of the victims. In 2013, on the 30th anniversary, families of the victims, including some survivors like Hugo Bernal, gathered in Mejorada del Campo to leave flowers and candles at the monument. In Bogotá, a mural honoring the deceased intellectuals, such as Manuel Scorza and Marta Traba, was inaugurated in 1984 at the National University of Colombia. Thank you for flying with me back to November 27, 1983. Avianca Flight 011 reminds us how crucial communication and precision are in aviation, especially in challenging environments. If you enjoyed this reconstruction, please give it a like, subscribe, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos. Which flights would you like to see on the channel? Let me know in the comments.